Every country on Earth is in debt. The United States owes $38 trillion, and the entire planet owes $315 trillion, 3 times larger than the global economy. But here's the paradox no one wants to face. If everyone owes money, who is actually owed? When you trace the creditors, when you follow the chain of ownership, something disturbing appears. The world doesn't owe money to anyone in particular. The world owes money to itself. But that structure wasn't an accident. It was engineered deliberately by 4 men across 3 centuries. 4 financial architects who designed a system where debt is permanent, interest flows upward, taxpayers fund the machine, and collapse is impossible because the system won't allow it. This is not conspiracy. This is documented history. The meetings happened. The contracts exist. The architecture is public record. To understand how the world became trapped inside a $315 trillion web, we need to go back to 1694, to the man who built the first pillar of the modern debt system, William Paterson. The birth of permanent national debt, 1694. Before 1694, kings borrowed the old-fashioned way. They went to merchants or nobles, promised repayment, and if they couldn't pay, they defaulted. Messy, embarrassing, but contained. Debt ended. The slate cleared. England was at war with France. King William III needed money desperately. Tax revenue wasn't enough. Traditional lenders refused to risk another loan to a government that had already defaulted. Paterson approached the crown with one audacious idea. A group of wealthy merchants would loan the government £1.2 million, about $300 million today. But here was the revolutionary twist. The government would pay 8% interest every year forever. Only the interest, never the principal. To manage this permanent debt, Paterson proposed a new institution, the Bank of England. Here's how the mechanics worked. 1. Merchants deposit their gold into the Bank of England. 2. The bank lends that gold to the government. 3. The government pays interest from taxes. 4. The bank passes that interest to the merchants. But the merchants' loan receipts could be traded, becoming a new type of money backed by government debt. And the real innovation, *** government IOUs became currency. Debt became money. ***, the more debt the government issued, the more money banks could create. Debt was no longer a burden. It was the foundation of the entire financial system. Within 50 years, every major European power copied the model. France created its own central bank. The Netherlands formalized large-scale government debt. And in 1790, Alexander Hamilton modeled the American financial system on this blueprint. Paterson died in 1719, not particularly wealthy. But the machine he created still runs the world. British government debt has never been paid off. It has only been refinanced, expanded, and rolled over for 331 years. 2. Nathan Rothschild, turning sovereign debt into a global industry. 1800s. By the early 1800s, European governments were borrowing constantly for wars, infrastructure, and operations, but the system was chaotic. Each loan was negotiated individually. Interest rates were unpredictable. Only a handful of wealthy merchants could participate. Nathan Rothschild industrialized the process. The Rothschild brothers established banking houses in London, Paris, Frankfurt, Vienna, Naples. Their network allowed money to move across borders faster than any government could. Nathan Rothschild, operating from London, turned sovereign debt into a scalable industry. His innovation, the secondary market, he bought government bonds at a discount, resold them to investors at a markup, and pocketed the spread. Investors got a tradable asset, and Rothschild controlled the middle. Then came the moment that made him a legend. In 1815, during the Battle of Waterloo, Nathan Rothschild learned of Napoleon's defeat a full day before official messengers. He used that information to manipulate the British bond market. 1. He sold British bonds, signaling a British loss. 2. Investors panicked and sold off their holdings. 3. When prices collapsed, Rothschild bought enormous quantities. 4. When victory was announced the next day, prices surged. 5. His profit was massive and completely legal at the time. This wasn't conspiracy. It was infrastructure. Control the information. Control the issuance. Control the market. By 1820, the Rothschilds dominated European sovereign debt. No government could easily borrow without them. And here's the crucial shift they engineered. Debt became so interconnected that default became impossible. A bond issued in London might be owned by a French investor pledged to a German bank, used as collateral for a Dutch loan traded to an Austrian aristocrat. If one government defaulted, the entire web shook. Default was no longer a local problem. It was a continental crisis. Governments became trapped. They had to keep paying. And they had to keep borrowing to pay old interest. Debt was now permanent, global, and inescapable. By 1900, the world had accepted the framework created by Paterson and industrialized by Rothschild. Debt was permanent. Debt was tradable. Debt was global. But the system still had limits. There was no central authority to backstop markets during crises. No institution that could create money yet, no global enforcer of payment. That changed with the third architect, J.P. Morgan. 3. J.P. Morgan, the American centralization of power, 1907 to 1913. At the start of the 20th century, the United States was banks operated independently. Money supply was tied to gold, and there was no mechanism to stabilize markets during Then came the panic of 1907. Stock prices crashed. Banks failed. The entire economy froze. And one man stepped in. J.P. Morgan, America's most powerful banker, locked the major financiers of New York inside his library and forced them to pledge their money to rescue failing banks. He acted like a central bank because the nation didn't have one. The panic ended. Morgan was hailed as a hero, but he knew the truth. The system could not survive without a permanent central authority. But Americans hated central banks. They had already killed 2 of them. So Morgan's Circle designed one the public would accept by disguising it. The Secret Meeting on Jekyll Island, 1910. In November 1910, a small group of senators, bankers, and Morgan associates boarded a private train to Jekyll Island, Georgia. No reporters, no notes, no public knowledge. For 9 days, they drafted the blueprint for a new institution, the Federal Reserve System. It was a masterpiece of independent from politics, but privately owned by member banks. In reality, the directors influenced the Federal Reserve Board. The New York Fed, controlled by Wall Street, held the real power, and most importantly, the Federal Reserve could create money to buy government debt. This was the missing mechanism. Before the Fed, government borrowing was limited by how much banks could lend. After the Fed, borrowing became limitless. Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act in December 1930. Most lawmakers never understood what they had approved. And overnight, the debt machine expanded. How the Fed completed the trap. The new system worked like this. 1. The government issues bonds. 2. The Federal Reserve buys them with newly created money. 3. The government spends the money. 4. Taxpayers pay interest on the debt forever. Debt no longer depended on savings or real capital. It depended only on demand from the central bank. The United States could now borrow without restraint, and debt became mathematically infinite. Morgan died the same year the Federal Reserve was created, 1913. But his architecture remains the backbone of the $38 trillion U.S. debt today. The trap had become self-sustaining. 4. Paul Volcker, The Globalization of the Debt Trap, 1979-1987. By the 1970s, the debt system was fully up, but developing nations were different. They borrowed heavily, often in dollars, and many struggled to repay. Then inflation hit the United States. Double-digit inflation, rising oil prices, declining trust in the dollar. Enter Paul Volcker, chairman of the Federal Reserve. In 1979, he made a brutal decision. It killed inflation, but it nearly killed the developing world. Countries like Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina had borrowed heavily in dollars during the 1970s when interest rates were low. Now those loans were coming due at triple the cost. Mexico owed $80 billion. Brazil owed $60 billion. Argentina owed $40 billion. The interest alone exceeded their export earnings. In August 1982, Mexico defaulted. The global banking system shook. American banks were exposed. If Mexico collapsed, U.S. giants like Citibank and Chase Manhattan would suffer catastrophic losses. Volcker could have allowed the market to clear. Let the banks take the losses. Wipe out bad debt. He didn't. Instead, he orchestrated a massive bailout through the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. The IMF, permanent debt for the developing world, the IMF stepped in with rescue loans. But these loans weren't designed to save countries. They were designed to ensure countries could keep paying interest to American and European banks. The conditions were harsh. Cut government spending, privatize state assets, open the economy to foreign corporations, devalue the currency, allow IMF supervision of national policies. This was not relief, but this was economic surrender. And here was the critical innovation. Asterisk, asterisk, the IMF didn't eliminate debt, it restructured it into permanence, asterisk, asterisk. Countries that couldn't pay were not allowed to default. They were refinanced, locked into cycles of interest payments that lasted decades. This model became global. Argentina, 2001. Greece, 2010. Sri Lanka, 2022. Every crisis followed the same script. IMF loans, austerity, loss of sovereignty. And the debt remained forever. Volcker died in 2019, but his design ensured the debt trap was global, permanent, and inescapable, the final synthesis. The modern debt machine, permanent national debt, interest paid forever. 2. Rothschild, 1800s. Make debt tradable across borders. Default becomes impossible. 3. Morgan, 1913. Create a central bank that can buy debt with new money. Borrowing becomes infinite. 4. Volcker, 1980s. When countries can't pay, don't forgive, restructure, and keep the interest flowing. This system now governs the entire world. Global debt is $315 trillion. None of it will ever be repaid. All of it generates interest, and default anywhere threatens collapse everywhere. Governments must keep borrowing. Central banks must keep printing. Taxpayers must keep paying. It is the largest and most enduring financial machine ever built. And almost no one understands who built it, or why it can't stop.